He didn't speak when he entered the room. He didn't ask if I was ready. He simply unbuttoned his shirt, one slow breath at a time, and looked at me like the answer had already been bought. That night, he didn't touch me like a lover. He touched me like a man collecting what was owed. And I let him. Not because I wanted to, but because no one had ever told me I had a choice. If you've ever questioned what love is, when it begins, when it ends, or if it can be born from, silence, stay. Like, subscribe, and let's explore the stories that don't start with yes, but might still end with one. I left the man I loved while carrying his child. The house was quiet at 3 a.m, the kind of silence that didn't soothe but settled heavy on the chest like a secret. The hallway lights were off, but I didn't need them. I had walked this path enough times, bare feet brushing the edge of the carpet runner, fingertips trailing along the wooden banister like muscle memory. In my hand, I held a single object, the ring he gave me. It had never fit quite right, always. A little too tight, too cold, too foreign, like it knew it didn't belong on my finger. I didn't wear it on our wedding night. I didn't wear it the morning after. But tonight, before I left, I slipped it on just once, to remember. I placed it on the oak console table in the front hall, right where I knew he'd see it. No letter. No goodbye. Just the ring. I wanted him to understand what words would only confuse. That I was leaving because I loved him, and loving him had become too much to carry. I opened the front door slowly, careful not to let the hinges creak, and stepped into the soft night air. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I walked toward the gate. But I didn't look back. Not yet. The child inside me fluttered once, a gentle twist low in my belly. I rested a hand over it. He doesn't know, I whispered silently, not sure if I meant the man or the baby. Maybe neither. Maybe both. I was 23, and I was walking away from everything. His house, his name, his unreadable eyes, carrying the only piece of him I could never return. I didn't cry. Not even when the wind brushed my cheeks like his hands used to. Not even when I saw the porch light flicker once behind me and hoped, briefly, foolishly, that he might come running after me. He didn't. But then again, Nathaniel Hale had never been the kind of man who chased things. He collected. He acquired. And once he had something, he kept it under lock and key. I was supposed to be one of those things. I married him because my father asked me to. Correction. My father traded me to him at 21. One signature. One binding contract. One glass of tea I couldn't finish that night in the Hale parlor, sitting beside 2 men discussing my future like the stock market. I didn't even know him then. Nathaniel Hale was 15 years older than me, widowed, rich, and, according to everything I read, utterly untouchable. When I looked into his eyes the first time, I thought they were cold. Later I would learn they weren't cold. They were careful. Like someone who had burned his hands one too many times to trust anything that felt warm. The night we married, he didn't speak more than 5 sentences to me. I remember all 5. Do you need anything? You don't have to pretend for anyone. This room is yours. I won't touch you unless you ask me to. And finally, when I said nothing, when I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands clenched so tightly they trembled, he said the 5th. But I will take what I've paid for. He didn't say it cruelly. Not angrily. Just plainly. Like a truth. A truth I didn't fight. Because part of me already knew fighting wouldn't change anything. Fighting wouldn't make it love. And surrendering wouldn't make it hate. So I gave him what was never supposed to be traded. I gave him myself. But I never gave him that ring. Until tonight. The gate moaned as I pushed it open. My breath caught. One final hesitation. One last plea that maybe just maybe, he was watching. That he knew. That he would stop me. But silence answered back. I stepped beyond the Hale estate, onto the main road lined with dormant cherry trees, and inhaled the damp Oregon air like it might cleanse me of what I was leaving behind. It didn't. The air still carried his scent. Cedarwood, whiskey, and something older, darker, like regret aged in oak. I paused at the edge of the road. Then, slowly, I turned around and looked back. The house stood tall against the night, all its windows dark, except one, his study. A light was on, and in that moment, I knew two things. One, he was awake. He had always been awake. And two, he had let me go. Not because he didn't care, but because he did. And he thought I needed to leave, to be free. What he didn't know was, I didn't want freedom anymore. I wanted him. But this time, on my terms. This time. Because I chose him. Not because someone else did. I took one last look at the house where I had been traded, kept, touched, and, somewhere in the quietest corners, loved. And I whispered to the wind, I'll come back. But not for the ring. Not for the name. For the man. For the father of this child. For the heart he doesn't know he gave me. Then I turned away. And I didn't look back again. The first time I met Nathaniel Hale was not at an altar, but at a table once used for afternoon teas, back when my mother still hosted them, before the tea house behind our estate was sold off to cover legal debts. I remember the chill that day. Not from the weather, but from the way my father's voice changed when he asked me to sit down. Wear something nice, he said without looking at me. Not too bold. Something modest. I wore my pale blue dress, the one Mama used to call my lucky color. It felt wrong that day. The tea was already cold when I sat. Across from me sat a man I had only seen in headlines and glossy charity brochures. Nathaniel Hale, widowed tech magnate, known for funding libraries and never smiling in photos. I remember thinking he looked more like a ghost than a man. Too still, too polished, too precise. His gray suit didn't wrinkle when he moved. His eyes didn't flinch when he looked at me. This is my daughter, Emily, my father said. Like he was introducing a property, not a person. Nathaniel gave me a small nod. It's a pleasure. It didn't feel like one. My father poured tea for 3 and explained the terms like he was discussing a business merger. The Hale family would provide financial support to prevent bankruptcy, restore our estate, and cover medical expenses for my mother. In exchange, I would become Mrs. Nathaniel Hale. No dowry, no romance, just ink on paper. I didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. I stared at the spoon resting against the saucer and imagined what would happen if I threw it. It was a childish thought, but it kept me breathing. When I finally found my voice, it sounded nothing like me. Why me? Nathaniel blinked. Father said you were quiet. I'm not, I answered, too quickly. Something flickered in his gaze. Not amusement, not anger, just something. I don't want a loud life, he said calmly. I want stability, silence, simplicity. I looked at my father, expecting him to speak up. He didn't. And just like that, it was settled. That evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, holding the unsigned contract. Mama knocked softly and stepped in. Her eyes looked tired in a way I didn't understand until much later. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and said, Sometimes we love with our hands before our hearts know how. Sometimes duty comes before dreams. I signed the paper without rereading it. The wedding was scheduled 1 week later. There was no dress fitting, no bridal shower, No mother-daughter shopping trips. Just a courier who delivered. A simple ivory gown and a set of instructions. The ceremony would be private, and punctuality was expected. When I arrived at the Hale estate for the first time, I was struck not by its size, but by its silence. There were no voices, no laughter, no music. Just walls that stood too straight, an air that smelled faintly of cedar and money. Nathaniel didn't greet me at the entrance. It was his assistant, a woman named Marla, who took my coat and led me to a drawing room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a single vase of white lilies. "He'll be down shortly," she said. "Everything's prepared." I sat on a velvet chair that didn't sink under me. My fingers fidgeted with the clasp of the clutch I hadn't wanted to bring. I heard footsteps, measured, quiet, deliberate. Then he entered. Nathaniel looked the same as he had in the tea house, composed, unreadable, more statue than man. He didn't reach for me. He didn't smile. "Shall we?" was all he said. We signed the marriage certificate in the study, across from the fireplace where the logs hadn't been lit. The officiant mumbled something about vows, but Nathaniel and I never looked at each other. We just nodded, inked our names, and shook hands. No kiss, no celebration. Afterward, I was led to my new room on the second floor. It was larger than my childhood bedroom 3 times over, with soft gold curtains, cream-colored sheets, and a window overlooking the lake behind the house. The closet had already been filled with clothing in my size. Neutral tones, expensive fabrics, nothing I would have picked. It wasn't until I stepped into the ensuite bathroom that I let myself feel something. I stared at my reflection. Not because I looked different, but because I didn't. I was still Emily Grace Bennett, just with a new last name no one had heard me say out loud. I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub, fingers curled around the sink. I whispered to the silence, "You're not a wife. You're an agreement." And that night, when the door creaked open and I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't ask why he came. I only listened and waited, because something in his steps told me I wasn't the only one holding my breath. The first night we shared a room, there was no thunder, no lightning, no excuses made of alcohol or overwhelming passion. Just quiet. Deafening, consuming quiet. He entered the room like he always did, measured, contained, in control. He didn't knock. There was no need. This room, like the house, like me, had been signed over with a few strokes of ink. I stood by the window, watching the lake beyond the trees. The reflection of moonlight danced faintly across the water. I didn't turn when I heard the door click shut behind him. But I felt it. His presence, like cold air against the back of my neck. "I won't take what isn't offered," he said quietly. My fingers clenched the edge of the curtain. I wasn't sure why. The words were kind. They were merciful. But they felt rehearsed, like something he'd said before, to someone else. I turned around slowly. He was standing near the bed, his jacket already folded neatly on the armchair. The top button of his shirt was undone. His eyes, gray, sharp, unreadable, rested on me with something that was not hunger and not affection. Just intention. "What, if I don't offer anything?" I asked. He studied me for a long moment. "Then I'll leave." I waited. He didn't move. "But I'll always wonder," he continued, "if your silence meant no, or if it meant you never knew how to say yes." My breath hitched. He stepped forward. 1 step, 2. I didn't back away. It wasn't desire that anchored me there, not curiosity, not defiance, just stillness. The same stillness that had followed me since the day I signed my name beside his. His hand reached out, stopped just short of mine. Fingers hovering, close enough that I felt the warmth of his skin. "Emily," he said. Not a command, not a plea. Just my name. As though he was testing how it tasted when spoken aloud. That was all it took. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. I let go of the curtain. And in that wordless permission, he closed the distance. He kissed me without warning, but not without care. His mouth was warm, steady, too practiced for a man who claimed to want silence. His hands found my waist like he'd imagined this moment long before it happened. My body reacted before my heart could catch up. Heat, tension, confusion knotting, together until I couldn't separate one from the other. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Wanted? Owned? Seen? There was no urgency in him, just precision. He undressed me like someone who didn't expect resistance, but didn't take it for granted either. My nightgown pooled to the floor like spilled milk. I stood there, naked under his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt claimed, and that frightened me more than anything. When he laid me down, he didn't speak. Not a whisper, not a breath wasted on explanation. His touch was clinical, deliberate. A man who knew what bodies did and how to make them respond, but hadn't yet learned that bodies were not just flesh. They were memory. They were permission. They were pain, and yet I didn't say no, because somewhere, in the quietest, most hidden part of me, I needed to know if giving myself to him would make me feel something. Anything. The pain was brief, but not gentle. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't look me in the eye when it happened. But when it was over, and the room settled into silence again, I saw it. Just for a second. In the way his shoulders slumped. In the way he exhaled like he had been holding his breath too long. Regret. Or maybe it was something worse. Relief. He stood, buttoned his shirt again, and turned toward the door. "You can. Sleep here if you like," he said. "As opposed to where?" I asked, voice dry, brittle. He didn't answer. He left, and I lay there, still staring at the ceiling, the weight of the sheets suddenly unbearable. In the morning, I found a single cup of tea on the nightstand. It wasn't hot, but it hadn't gone cold either, as if it had been brewed and placed there at the perfect moment. Just enough warmth left to say, "I thought of you," but not enough to say I waited. There was a note tucked underneath the saucer. Only one sentence. "You don't owe me anything. Now." I stared at the words for a long time. My fingers trembled as I folded the paper and slipped it into the drawer, beside the wedding ring I still hadn't worn. I didn't cry that day, not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't know where the breaking began. That night changed something in me, not just because I lost what most people called innocence, but because I realized that love was not always soft, that sometimes it entered without permission, took what it needed, and left you wondering if you were still whole. I wasn't angry at Nathaniel. I wasn't anything at all. And that was the scariest part. It started with the smallest sound. I had opened the top drawer of Nathaniel's desk looking for a blank envelope to send a letter to my mother. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I had lived in his house for over a month, slept in his bed only once, eaten dinner in silence more times than I could count. And still, I didn't know where the stationery was. The drawer glided open smoothly. There was nothing inside but pens, a notepad with the Hale family crest, and a small wooden box tucked against the back corner. It was a music box. Old. Carved from walnut. The kind with a hand crank and a tiny ballerina standing in the center, faded now, her dress chipped at the edge. I knew I shouldn't touch it. The air around it felt private. But my fingers reached before I could stop them. When I opened the lid, the melody creaked to life, slow, tentative, the kind of tune meant to soothe a child to sleep. It wasn't beautiful, but it was familiar. I'd heard it before. My mother used to hum it when I had trouble falling asleep. A tune, she said, came from a music box she saw as a child but never owned. So how did it end up here? And then I saw the letter tucked beneath the lining of the box, just behind the ballerina's tiny feet. I pulled it out carefully. The paper was cream-colored, folded neatly, the edges softened with time. The handwriting on the front wasn't Nathaniel's. It said, simply, to her if she ever comes, her. I sat down at the desk, heart pacing in quiet rebellion, and unfolded the letter. Dearest, if you are reading this, then you must be here, in the place I once thought I would stay forever. You're not me. I know that. But if Nathaniel brought you here, it means you are braver than I was. Or maybe softer. Either way, you are the one who will stay. Don't be fooled by his silence. He watches more than he speaks, feels more than he shows. He is a man who carries love like a secret he's afraid will ruin him if spoken aloud. He loved me once, but I was a storm he couldn't tame. You are the quiet after, and if you're here, it means he's still trying to love, even if he doesn't know how. So be patient, with him, and with yourself. Love is a language some people learn late. Clara, his late wife, the woman I had never met, never spoken about, never seen photos of in the house. Her name had hovered like dust, unspoken, always present. But this wasn't what I expected from her. I read the letter again, slower this time, letting each line land with the weight it deserved. You are the one who will stay. That line stayed, with me longer than it should have, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Not after that night. Not after weeks of polite avoidance and clipped sentences. But this letter, it cracked something. Not in Nathaniel. In me, it made me wonder if everything I thought I understood was wrong. If maybe he hadn't just married me because of a deal. Maybe there was something else, something he hadn't said. I folded the letter back up and placed it in my jewelry drawer. Not hidden, just somewhere safe. That night, at dinner, I watched him more closely. Nathaniel sat across from me, spooning soup without looking up. He wore the same kind of suit he always did. His cuffs were perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle on him. But his eyes looked tired. "Where did you get the music box?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, spoon halfway to his lips. Then he set it down. "It belonged to Clara," he said. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just curious." He didn't ask if I'd opened it, and I didn't tell him I had. Not yet. Later that evening, I found myself outside the door to his study. I didn't knock. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, wondering who he really was. The man who took what he paid for? Or the man who still kept music boxes with love letters hidden inside? I almost walked in. Almost. But then I heard it. The music. The same creaking melody, playing softly from behind the closed door. He was playing it. Not for me, for her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house settle, wood groaning, wind whispering through the trees. And in that hush, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding since the wedding. Was I a replacement? Had he chosen me because I reminded him of Clara? Because I was the safe version of a woman he couldn't keep? And worse, was I falling for a man who hadn't chosen me at all? The next morning, he wasn't at breakfast. Marla, his assistant, handed me a sealed envelope. "He asked me to give you this," she said. Inside was a short note. "You may redecorate the guest room. I won't use it. I'll be staying downstairs for a while. N." There was no explanation, no apology, no emotion, just distance, wrapped neatly in perfect handwriting. I placed the note beside Clara's letter, and that's when I realized she was never trying to warn me about Nathaniel. She was trying to warn him about me. It started with a frame slightly tilted on the shelf. I wasn't meant to be in his study. After his note, we had not spoken for 4 days. Our interactions had been reduced to Marla relaying messages and meals left under silver lids on trays. The silence between us wasn't cold. It was suspended, like a breath not yet exhaled. I entered the study to leave a file Marla had asked me to drop off. That was all. But then I saw the photo. A black and white image, set in a simple frame, leaning unevenly on the corner of the bookcase. It showed a schoolyard, wooden benches, children with lunchboxes and grass-stained socks, a boy with unruly hair, a girl in the center, standing slightly apart, wearing a frayed cardigan, her eyes cast down. My breath caught. It was me, at maybe 9 or 10, in the uniform of my old public school back in Ash Hollow. I remembered the day faintly. The awkward photographer, the sticky lemonade afterward. I had no memory of ever seeing Nathaniel that day. But the photo said otherwise. I lifted the frame with trembling hands. There was no note, no label, just silence. My fingers traced the glass. My throat tightened. Why was this photo here? How long had he kept it? And why had he never said anything? I confronted him that evening. I waited by the stairs until I heard the garage door open. Then footsteps, slow, even, tired. He saw me before he even set his briefcase down. I found the photograph, I said. He didn't ask which one. He just closed his eyes. For how long? I asked. How long have you known me? Nathaniel leaned against the banister, the faintest flicker of something. Regret. Fear. Moving behind. His eyes. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me. He looked at me for a long time. Then he walked past me, into the study, leaving the door ajar. I followed. He sat at the desk and spoke without looking up. I visited your school when I was 27. It was a charitable visit. Clara was alive then. She had arranged the donation. Books. Computers. I went because she was too ill to travel. His voice was steady, almost mechanical. I remember being irritated. I didn't want to go. But then I saw you. He finally looked up. You were sitting by yourself, under a willow tree, reading a book. You looked lost. Not sad. Not scared. Just like you were waiting for something that wasn't coming. I swallowed. My hands curled into fists. I didn't know your name. He continued. Not until years later. After Clara passed, I began donating to schools again. One day your name showed up on a scholarship application. I recognized it immediately. I remembered the eyes. He paused. His jaw clenched. I watched from a distance. Paid for what I could, never interfered, and then, when your father approached me, I should have said no. Why didn't you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Nathaniel looked at me like he was seeing the child again, not the woman standing before him. Because I was already halfway in love with a ghost of a girl who read under trees and didn't know she was being watched. I turned away. The confession should have made things clear, but it only made the walls tilt. Had he married me because of kindness, guilt, Obsession? I didn't know. And worse, I didn't know what it made me. An orphan in waiting? A charity case? A possession finally claimed? That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house felt different now. It no longer echoed. It whispered. I stood by the window in my room, watching the wind stir the surface of the lake. I thought about the girl in the photograph, her dirty shoes, her missing buttons, the way she always hoped someone would notice but feared what it meant if they did. That girl had never imagined she'd grow up to marry the man who noticed. She had certainly never imagined he'd touch her without speaking, and she never imagined she'd want him to try again, but this time differently. The next morning, I went back to the study. The photo was gone. In its place was a new one, our wedding certificate framed. The ring I never wore still sat in my drawer, untouched. I stared at the certificate, wondering what was real and what was arrangement, what was affection and what was duty. A soft knock pulled me from the thought. It was Marla. "He's asked me to pass this on," she said, handing me a thin envelope. Inside was a single sentence. "I never meant to haunt you, but I don't know how else to love." I held the letter in both hands, and I realized something strange. I didn't want to run. Not yet. Not anymore. Because for the first time, I saw Nathaniel not as the man who had taken me, but as the boy who had never learned how to keep anything he loved. The attic wasn't locked, but it felt forbidden. I hadn't been up there since I arrived. The house was large enough to lose yourself in without ever touching its top floor. But that morning, after finding the letter and staring too long at the empty frame where my photograph had once stood, I needed to climb. The stairs were narrow, creaking beneath my weight like they resented being remembered. Dust floated in columns of light from the skylights. The air smelled of cedar and old canvas, and then I saw it, leaning against the far wall, half covered by a linen sheet. I didn't have to pull the cloth back to know what it was. Something in my chest already knew, but I pulled it anyway. The portrait was unfinished. My face looked younger, softer, rounder, like the Emily of 5 years ago, but it was unmistakably me. The curve of the jaw, the tilt of the chin, the same uncertain gaze I once caught in mirrors during nights I couldn't sleep. He had painted me, not from memory, from watching. I reached out and touched the edge of the canvas, as if the oils might still be wet, as if the silence in the room might shatter if I made a sound. He had started with my eyes. I could tell. The detail was painstaking, as if, even then, he hadn't been sure what I would look like, just what I would feel like to him. Wanted. Not owned. Not traded. Just wanted. When I returned to the main floor, I didn't look for him. I went to the garden instead. I needed sky above my head, needed something bigger than the walls he'd kept between us. I sat on the stone bench under the old ash tree, watching the fountain ripple with the breeze. The sun felt too warm for October. Or maybe my skin was just waking up. I had been numb for so long. The footsteps came quietly behind me. I didn't turn around. "You found it?" he said. I nodded. "It's not finished," I murmured. "I know." "Why didn't you?" He didn't sit beside me. He stood a few paces back, as if still unsure whether he was welcome in his own story. "I was afraid," he said, "that if I finished it, it would become real." I looked up then. He looked older in the daylight. Not tired, just exposed. "You were afraid of me?" I asked, surprised. "No," he said softly. "I was afraid of needing you." We sat, in silence for a long while, the kind that didn't hurt, the kind that stitched things back together. He finally sat down beside me. I used to think love was something you earned. That it came after good behavior, after consistency, after years of knowing someone. But you, he shook his head. You shattered that. I turned to him. Why me? His eyes didn't waver. Because you made me remember what it felt like, to hope. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to forgive everything, but I was ready to stop pretending I hadn't been waiting for these words. And maybe I was ready to speak too. I used to think love was a rescue, I said quietly. That someone would come and fix everything. But I realize now it's not rescue. It's presence. It's staying, even when it's hard. Nathaniel reached for my hand. He didn't grab it. He offered it, and I took it. That evening, I returned to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I had kept both letters, Clara's and his. I read them both again. I didn't cry, but I understood. Clara hadn't been a rival. She had been a mirror in a different frame, a woman who had loved the same man, and who, in her parting, had made space for someone else to arrive whole. And Nathaniel. He hadn't needed a replacement. He had needed permission to try again, and I had needed to see myself through eyes that didn't ask me to become someone else. Later, I went to the studio beside the library. It was a room I hadn't dared enter until now. The canvas was still there, beside his brushes and jars of oil pigment. I stared at the half-painted version of myself and whispered, I'm still becoming. Don't rush it. And in that whisper, I forgave us both. When he found me there, I didn't startle. He stood in the doorway, watching me the same way he once watched from afar. But this time, I watched back. You should finish it, I said. He stepped closer. Only if you let me paint you as you are now. I smiled. Then you'd have to see me. His voice was low. I already do. We returned to Ash Hollow just after the first frost. The train windows were fogged with the breath of early winter, and I spent most of the ride watching the trees blur by, trying to remember how it felt to belong to something before I belonged to someone. Nathaniel sat across from me. We hadn't spoken much since I asked him to come home with me, not to visit, not to escape, but to see where I came from, to see who I used to be, and maybe to see if he still wanted me when I wasn't standing in his house. Surrounded by silence and soft lights and contracts, no one read out loud. We arrived mid-morning. The house I grew up in looked smaller than I remembered, a little more crooked, the porch still leaning slightly to the left. Mama had planted chrysanthemums by the steps. They were yellow, her favorite. Nathaniel opened the gate for me. He didn't ask if I wanted him to. He just did. When my mother answered the door, her eyes narrowed. Not with suspicion, but protection. She looked at him the way mothers look at men who've made their daughters quiet. Ma, I said gently, this is Nathaniel. He didn't offer his hand. He bowed his head. Ma'am, he said, thank you for having me. Something shifted in her face then. Not forgiveness, not warmth, but recognition. That this man, who once moved through boardrooms and courthouses, like he owned the air, had learned how to lower his head when it mattered most. Inside, everything was just as I left it. The wallpaper curling slightly at the corners, the couch with the middle cushion that sagged, the kettle on the stove that always whistled too soon. I made tea. Mama sat with Nathaniel in the living room, her hands folded around her knees, watching him like he might vanish if she blinked. You're quiet, she said after a while. Nathaniel nodded. Emily tells me that often. Good, Mama said. The men who talk the most often listen the least. He smiled, just slightly. That night, we stayed in the guest room at the end of the hall, the same room I used to sneak into when thunderstorms made the walls feel too thin. Nathaniel didn't ask if he should sleep elsewhere. I didn't offer. We lay in the dark, not touching, not speaking, until he whispered, "Your mother reminds me of you." "She's stronger," I said. "Not stronger," he replied. "Just finished." I didn't sleep for hours, not because I was restless, because I finally wasn't. The next morning, Nathaniel woke before I did. I found him in the kitchen, apron around his waist, standing over a pan of eggs he was definitely overcooking. The toast was already burnt. "Is this your apology?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. He looked up, sheepish. "No, this is my offering." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in weeks. Mama came in not long after. She raised an eyebrow at the smoke curling from the toaster. "Lord help me," she muttered, and took over like she'd never left the stove. Nathaniel stepped back without protest, letting her elbow him aside with a wooden spoon and a glare. But he didn't leave the kitchen. He stayed. He cut fruit. He set the table. He poured juice. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but earnestly. And that, more than any words he'd said, made my mother glance at me across the steam rising from the kettle and nod, almost imperceptibly. She saw him, and maybe finally so did I. That afternoon we sat on the porch, Nathaniel and I, sipping tea while Mama napped inside. "Why did you come?" I asked softly. He looked out at the road, where kids were racing bicycles down the gravel path. "Because you asked me to," he said. "That's not enough." He nodded. "I know." He set his cup down. "I came because I wanted to see what made you. Because if I'm going to ask you to stay, I need to know who I'm asking." My heart stumbled. "I haven't decided," I whispered. "If I'm staying." "I know," he said again. "That's why I'm here. To give you the space to choose." He looked at me then, not like a man who owned anything, but like a man willing to lose everything. "I won't ask again," he said. "But if you come back, it won't be because of debt or duty or ghosts. It'll be because of today, because of what we built, not what we inherited." I didn't answer him. Not then. But I reached for his hand, and I held it. Not as a wife, not as a trade, but as a woman choosing to listen to what her heart had been whispering since the silence first broke. That evening, before we left, Mama called me into the kitchen alone. She handed me a box, small, velvet, old. "This was mine," she said. "I never wore it. It didn't feel right with your father. But it might feel right with him." Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth with time. "No diamonds?" I teased. "Too flashy," she smiled. "Love shouldn't be loud." I slipped the box into my bag, not because I was ready, but because I finally believed I might be. That night back on the train, I leaned against Nathaniel's shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just let me rest. And when I reached for his hand beneath the blanket, he laced our fingers together like a man who had learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, that love isn't something you take. It's something you wait for. It took me 3 weeks to return. I didn't tell him I was coming. I didn't write, didn't call. I wanted to arrive without expectation, without obligation. I wanted it to be my decision, entirely mine. When I stepped out of the taxi in front of the Hale estate, the house looked the same. Tall, stoic, still wrapped in quiet. But something about it felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I stood in front of the gate, remembering the first night I left. The way my heart had thudded so loudly in my chest. It had drowned out the sound of my own footsteps. This time I wasn't trembling. I was home. The front door was unlocked. It creaked softly when I pushed it open, as though remembering the last time I walked through it. I stepped inside, and the scent hit me instantly. Cedarwood, linen, faintly citrus, and something uniquely his. The walls were the same, the paintings untouched, the silence familiar. But the air held something new. Hope. "Nathaniel?" I called gently. No response. I moved through the house slowly, my fingers grazing the edges of furniture, my eyes catching on details I hadn't noticed before. The scratch on the banister, the faded rug in the hallway, the indentation on the armrest where he used to sit and read. I found him in the library. He was seated in the armchair by the window, eyes closed, a book resting on his chest. He looked peaceful, unguarded. I didn't speak right away. I watched. His hair was a little longer, brushed back but unruly at the ends. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms I had once feared, then trusted, and his hand, resting palm up on the arm of the chair, was empty. For some reason, that made my throat tighten. He stirred as I stepped closer. His eyes blinked, opened slowly, and when he saw me, he didn't react. Not with surprise or relief or urgency, just stillness, like seeing me felt. Right. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would," I answered truthfully. He nodded once, and now I walked to him. "I'm not here because of guilt," I said, "or debt, or because I miss the quiet." He waited. "I'm here," I whispered, "because I remember who I was before you, and I like who I am after." His lips parted slightly, a breath caught somewhere between disbelief and hope. "I can't promise perfection," he said. "I've spent most of my life getting love wrong." "I'm not asking for perfect," I said. "Just real." He stood slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "You came back," he repeated. I smiled. "I came home." We stood in silence for a moment. Then, without a word, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small velvet box my mother had given me. He looked at it confused. "It's not the ring you gave me," I said. "That one was a transaction. This one's a choice." I opened the box. A simple gold band. No diamonds, no inscription. He looked at me like I was the first sunrise he'd seen in years. "May I?" I asked. He held out his hand, and I slid the ring onto his finger, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. He stared down at it for a long time. "Is this a beginning?" he asked. I stepped closer, resting my forehead against his. "No," I whispered. "This is the middle, the part where we stop surviving and start living." He kissed my forehead, gentle, slow, reverent, and for the first time, I felt like a wife. Not a bride, not a bargain, a partner. Later, as the sun set over the lake, we sat on the back porch in quiet companionship. The sky burned orange, the wind whispering through the trees. Nathaniel reached for my hand, entwining our fingers. "Will you ever wear the ring I gave you?" he asked lightly. I glanced down at my bare left hand. "Maybe," I said. "Someday." "But not today?" I shook my head. "Today I wear something else." "What's that?" I looked at him. My own name, my own voice, my own choice. He smiled, the kind that made his eyes crinkle, and the world slow down. And that was enough. Inside the drawer of my nightstand, the original ring still rested in its box, unworn, untouched, but no longer unloved. Because it wasn't about the ring anymore. It was about the hand that offered it, and the heart that had learned, through silence, mistakes, and time, that love isn't about ownership. It's about returning. Even when you don't have to. I was traded at 21. But today, I am not a trade. I am a woman who left and chose to come back, with nothing to prove and everything to give. If this story touched something quiet in you, something you thought was forgotten or too late, then you're exactly where you need to be. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that understand silence, honor healing, and believe in love, even when it comes late.